Hey Warhammer fans, welcome back, and it's time for us to go and check out the mechanics for the Greenskins. The Black Orcs I was seeing with other classes so far in mechanics come with a new mechanic called Fightiness. Fightiness has a base of 0 and caps at 30 instead of 100 like some other skills we've seen. Offensive skills will generate Fightiness for you as stated on the tooltip. So it's not a standard amount, it will depend on what skill you use as long as an offensive one, and how much you get also we're going to find out in the future. However, getting hit by an ability that you do not block will lower your fightiness by 1. It is important to note here that if you block it, you don't lose your fightiness. However, Black Orcs will also come with a secondary mechanic called Clobbering Time. Ooh, Fantastic Four memories coming back into mind right now. This ability costs 25 fightiness to use and applies a debuff on yourself. Now, this debuff will have the following effects. First of all, you will not gain any fightiness, nor you'll be able to block. You will lose access to one-handed weapon abilities. Clobbering Time enables you to use two-handed abilities. This is a weapon, remember, when we talked about the hard specializations, the two-handed weapon will be slotted on your range slot, something that hasn't been used in the past in the other versions of the game. And these abilities will have a different set of uses than the one-handed ones. I'm assuming they will have more damage, and maybe there will be a bit of AoE, giving you an opportunity to do more damage, whether it's going to be single target or AoE, while the single-handed ones will be a bit more sustained and so on and so forth. Nevertheless, the Black Orcs will have some of the non-weapon skills such as guard still available to them during Clobbering Time. This mechanism does not have an internal cooldown because it only gets reduced when you don't block something. And keep in mind that every class has block, and Black Orcs want to have a fair amount of block rating because of this. And just to remember that, put this on a little bit of italics there, anyone can block even without a shield, so the Butcher spec will benefit from the block as well. I think the Black Orcs is one of the few classes that have 2 tanking specs instead of 1. So also, this mechanism, Clobbering Time, you cannot remove it, so you must choose very, very carefully and wisely when you're going to activate those 10 seconds, because remember, during that time, you will not gain fightiness with your primary mechanic, you will not be able to block, and you will lose all your one-handed weapon abilities. So it's, again, resource management and a lot of choices in combat. Next class for the Greenskins, Da Boys. Da Boys, also known as Choppa. So they are really modified like some other classes we've seen before. So Da Boys now will be using a mechanic called Psychic Energy. Well, they're psychos anyways, but anyways. Psychic Energy base will start at 0 and max out at 250 over 30 that we've seen on the Orcs. You will generate automatically 2 per second, which means possibly you get into combat with that, unless otherwise stated. You will also generate 8 psychic energy whenever a group mate within 100 feet is using a basic attack. Small reminder, not every class has a basic reminder, so I'm assuming that composition of groups might have something to do with that. Also, abilities that cost psychic energy are stronger than the abilities that cost action points. So again, a mechanism with 2 components, psychic energy and action points. Management comes into play again. Big Arns are mobile melee DPS for Greenskins compared to the Black Orc Butcher, which is a bruiser. Personally, I don't really know exactly what a mobile melee DPS is compared to a bruiser. As far as I know, bruisers are a little bit tankier DPS than the normal ones, but I'm a bit confused about mobility in this game to this point, how it affects the gameplay, whether they have different speeds, whether, I don't know, because we kept seeing mobility, mobile DPS and things like that. I really need to make some clarification there, but let's keep in mind that they're not like the Butchers, which is bruisers, they're just melee, mobile melee DPS. Also, their psychic abilities are stronger than melee, and we mentioned this before, but oftentimes with additional effects or targets. So it looks like, since it says additional effects, I'm assuming there will be some sort of enchantments going on or something like that to help the group or targets. Maybe they're a bit more AoE orientated. Again, though, we have to look at that mechanic with the management issues. Now, the boys will also have bow skills, and they start with a minus 30% accuracy penalty to all their bow skills. Just to remind you what accuracy does, and I'm quoting, reduces enemy dodge and block to a minimum of 0. Negative accuracy increases enemy dodge. However, although you start with that number, and I'm assuming again, because we haven't seen the trees yet, there might be skills that allow you to reduce this, or you might find gear that have more accuracy to help you out. However, as everything else in this game and the designers we've seen so far, there is always a trade-off. And the trade-off here is that the boys do not suffer range penalty modifier to damage from being a 65 feet skill. So it looks like range skills do less damage the closer they are to the enemy, and the more they do, the further they are. So they may have less accuracy, but they don't lose damage. Also, bow skills are action point costs. They cost action points, and melee skills require psychic energy. This means they can be capable melee fighters, but lack sustain in melee and would need to be at range to sustain damage. So if you're going to play this spec, you're going to have to be in range. You can go close. So again, like other classes we've seen, you have to go in close range, do your burst, and then go back, recharge, and come in and go out. This back and forth, I really start to like it in theory, but we need to see how that's going to work out for warband play, because it looks good on small scale, but I'm not sure how effective that's going to be into warband play if you gotta push forward and back to maintain your mechanics. Things like this remain to be seen, hopefully on the test that is coming. Finally, they also gain magic abilities. So magic damage for the boys is going to be medium range. So they're going to be used like shortcast nukes that cost psychic energy. So we see a little bit of a burst in medium range, along with the bow, which is medium range. And melee skills that cost action points. So the math move into melee, and when out of energy, they got to go in their melee. When they run out of energy, build up the energy, go back out, cast, use the psychic energy, go back into melee, use action points, and so on and so forth. It's interesting, like I said, but I've got to see how that's going to work out in bigger scale. Next up, Goblins. Goblins, those unknown little speedrunners are back with a brand new mechanic called Cowardice, and start with a base of 0, capping at 100, and it will be reduced at a rate of 1 per second. Now, I need you to pay attention from this point forward, because things are getting a little bit more complicated. In order to increase Cowardice, you will need to be hit by melee or ranged abilities, and every time you're hit, it will be increased by 5. At 100, you will gain a debuff, not a buff, a debuff, for 15 seconds that disables certain skills and triggers additional effects based on spec. It looks like Cowardice is actually making you a coward, and you lose some of your abilities and you get some other effects we're probably going to see a little bit further down. Now, this is a little note here that the melee component is very important, as range skills and spells will not trigger Cowardice, and neither will AoE skills that have a range about past 10 feet, which is most of them. I'm not sure about this 100% how this works, but I'm just going to keep from this that you gotta go into melee range as pretty much everything else. Now, Goblins on the 3 hard specializations, Cowardice works differently. So for the Squig herders, which they can summon Squigs and fight alongside them in melee combat with a spear. So when they have high Cowardice, all of the spear skills are disabled. So you have no more spear skills close, but you do gain a movement spell, and you still are able to use your Squig abilities. So at 100, you can't do anything. You have to use your Squig abilities, which you manually control now, pretty much for all the pets and companions, and you get a speed buff. I'm not sure if there's going to be any tactics like before that when you get hit, you get speed, but it looks like you get your speed buff when you hit 100 Cowardice. You lose your skills, and you can only use that. The shooters, which are standard archers, but they have melee skills that have charges to use, so limited use. These skills become disabled, and a movement buff again spell is enabled when you become cowards. In addition, they will lose accuracy but gain range. So the standard shooters with the charged melee skills, they get disabled, they get a speed buff, and they also lose damage but they gain range. So we can see there's a lot of give and take here, negatives and positives. Squig raiders or riders. are tanks, as we know, non-standard tanks. So when they are in Squig form, they cannot have the Squig summoned, so it's a solo spec. When the card reaches 100, they explode backwards out of the Squig form, and their pet is automatically summoned. Outside of Squig form, they lose access to much of the tank toolkit, but gain access to pet abilities which have a different function. Probably they're going to have a little bit more tanking function here. But the funny thing about the Squig Riders is that it feels like it is a tank that doesn't want to be hit, because if you hit and you hit 100 cards, you come out of your tank form and you start using a totally different mechanism. Now, I am not sure yet how long the cooldown will be to return back to Squig form and be a tank again, but it's a weird mechanism. And I know for me it sounds a little bit weird, but here's a quote just to get an idea why the goblins work the way they work. And overall it is interesting to see it in action, but this is why they work the way we just described. Because all goblins are created with a playstyle where their skills change from the primary focus, I'm getting the fuck out of here, when under melee hits. And the idea is to make the meatball a tank spec while using this mechanic falls under the Interbellum idea that there should be reasons outside of just guard to actually target tank characters. Also remember that Squig Riders are specifically labeled non-standard, and their pet will have some lesser but still tank-orientated things to do when they are forced out. I would like to continue and add to this that the lore has the goblins to be hit and run characters, to put it this way. So they hit, if things get tough, they run. And we can see that throughout all three hard specializations here. We can see this throughout the cardinals mechanism and how that works. They get the speed buff when things get tough, you know, through the mechanism, and they run, they gain range, but they lose damage because they're running and they're scared. And the lore here, especially on the goblins, we can see, we've seen it on other classes of course, but here on the goblins specifically, we can see the lore and the character of the goblins coming into the gameplay, making this a lot more lore friendly, which is what Interbellum server wanted to do originally, try to make this more lore friendly. I'm telling you in advance, it's not going to be 100% because a lot of the lore stuff don't translate into gaming or other limitations, but they're making a huge effort to make this more lore friendly, which is a good thing for our universe. Last on the Greenskins, we have the Night Goblins, aka Shamans. Let's go and check how they have changed. I know how much a lot of people love Shaman, especially DPS Shaman, but now they're called Night Goblins, and they have a new mechanic called Paranoia, and this type of Shaman doesn't have anything to do with the one we've known in the previous versions. Now, Paranoia has a base of 0 and a max of 30, and Paranoia is reduced at a rate of 3 per second outside of combat. This is, I believe, the first mechanism we see that it gets reduced outside of combat. Paranoia applies negative effects to the caster at certain intervals based on the current value. The values are between 1 and 5 is 1 every 15 seconds, 6 to 10, 1 every 12 seconds, and with a maximum of 30 paranoia points, 1 every second. You can see the other breakdowns, breakpoints here below. Now, what are those negative effects? Those negative effects which are applied, and I believe they do stuck, are one of the followings. So the negative effects will be reducing your intelligence, willpower, initiative, agility, critical hit rating, potency, accuracy, block, incoming healing, inevitable, and unstoppable from you. And I believe they are stackable. So the more you use Paranoia, the more of those debuffs you're going to get on your character. Now, why would you want to use Paranoia and get all these negative things? The reason why you want to use Paranoia is because Paranoia has a single way of being increased, and that is through an ability called Fungus Beer. Actually, it's a cool name. So this ability is over the global cooldown, so you can use it along with other skills, and every time you use that, you get one of those negative effects we just mentioned, and that causes your next ability to be augmented. We've seen the augment again on the Sorc before and on the Rune Priest. And that augmentation comes at the cost of 2 Paranoia, which means the spell they last longer, or they're stronger, or they do more E. something that has to do with that spell that is amplified, augmented to a certain level. Now, each specialization has their own methods of reducing paranoia while in combat. So it's going to be something, I don't know, maybe spend action points or something like that to reduce it in combat, to give you a little bit more playability and sustain, I suppose. But overall, you should not expect to be able to spam Fungus Bear without consequences. Overall, this mechanism allows the Night Goblins to have burst effects, but at the cost of their sustain, as these debuffs begin to stack at high values of paranoia. At high values of paranoia. Maybe the lower values don't get stuck. After a certain level, you get the stacking effect. We'll clarify, we'll see in the future. However, for the Night Goblins and this mechanism, they haven't shared any more information. As you've seen on the Goblin, they were a little bit more specific. On this one, I think they should have given a little bit more information on this mechanism. Maybe we'll get some clarification in the future. And this concludes the 4 classes we have, and as final thoughts, I have to say that this is also another race that has some very nice, interesting mechanisms. Going back to the Black Orc, the whole fightiness, switching from single-hand weapon to two-handed weapon, it feels like a very engaging, fun mechanism. Again, have to make your choices because you won't be able to block, you won't be able to use one-handed weapon skills, and you switch to the two-hander. Choices seems to be very important in the mechanisms in Interbellum and resource management. The boys, the Choppas, have changed completely with psychic energy, medium range bow, medium range magic, and melee, the 3 different specializations there, with alternating between psychic energy and action points, going close and medium range constantly. Another very mobile gameplay into that. I don't know, and I'm going to say this, I hope it doesn't stir a shitstorm. I don't know if they're going to have Get to the Chopper or a similar kind of pull. I don't even know if pulls exist in this game, but we'll find out at some point. Goblins, interesting mechanism, very close to lore about them being a little bit coward and having to pull out of combat and then come back into it. Another very active mobile gameplay. The tank, I'm very interesting to try the Goblin tank with this mechanism card, this where you explode, you run back, and then you get locked out of certain skills, and then you have to use just your pet to carry on. And of course, Night Goblins that are totally different than what they were before. It's also something interesting I would like to try out. And this augmenting and debuffing mechanism also feels very interesting. And I think people will have a lot of fun playing these classes, as they did in the previous versions, because despite the fact that I played Dwarves, I've always said that the Greenskins, especially the Goblins, are the most fun classes to play. And I think this will stay true for this version of the game as well. So if you're a dev and part of the dev team and I've said something wrong, please do correct me. I'll try and pin those corrections on top on the comments. For the rest of you, don't forget to like, subscribe, share, comment, help the channel grow. Don't forget that subscribe button is very important, and I'll see you on the next video.